We're looking this morning at this figure called the Visitation by Jacob Epstein. As his name might suggest, he was Jewish, born in America, but at the age of 25, he came to England and was really a British sculptor. His work was really controversial, not least because he did a whole series of nude statues for the front of a building in the Strand, and that caused great upset. But he's also known, for quite a lot of important religious sculpture. On the front of Coventry Cathedral, he has the magnificent statue of St. Michael and the Devil. He did a beautiful Madonna and Child for Cavendish Square in London. The Tate has a magnificent statue of Jacob wrestling the angel, a beautiful monumental work. He did Oscar Wilde's tomb in Paris. So he's well known, and he's done some religious work before. This work he did in 1926, and at the time they were quite surprised by the rough texture, the harsh, rough-hewn realism of it. It was quite a distance from the kind of classical sculpture of the 1900s, the 19th century. In this figure, he said, "I would have liked it to stand among the trees on a knoll overlooking Monk Wood." Well, there is in fact a version. There are a number of versions in galleries. There is a version in Scotland, that stands in a grove of trees. But I think the Queensland Art Gallery has done a wonderful job here by setting it in this beautiful courtyard under these trees with the vines. So it's in a setting, I think, that Jacob himself would have appreciated. He used a model of a music student and was really taken by her modest demeanour and her humility. And he said he wanted to express a humility so profound as to shame the beholder who comes to my sculpture expecting rhetoric or splendour of gesture. And it really is quite extraordinary. It's true that the other figure of Elizabeth was never completed, but this in itself is enough. The Virgin Mary goes to visit Elizabeth, and she has this great exclamation of joy, and saying, "Blessed are you among all women, blessed is the fruit of your womb. Blessed is she who believed, that the promises made her by the Lord would be fulfilled." And Mary's response is just the epitome of humility. She says, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Saviour." So not me, but God. And I think that's ultimately what humility is about. And that's why I find this image beautifully evocative, because it summarises for me everything that the Magnificat is really about. Maeve, what do you think?
I have to say this was also one of the first ones that I chose, and there's a few reasons that also, if you want, move between the statue in itself and where it might have come from. I have to say, in my own journey of faith, Mary was not my first port of call. She always looked just too peaceful or too blonde and blue-eyed in my Irish background to kind of be drawn to her. And then as you get to know your faith, you realise, gosh, what a sturdy woman of substance. And I think when I first saw this statue, I mean, she's not your typically pretty, she's not your typically arranged, she's walking peaceful but worried, I would say, even the features of her face. And the features, you were talking about the artist before, he was known to like and draw from other cultures, Indian, African art more, and you can see it in the features. It's not your typical quote-unquote European attempt to represent Mary, a Jewish woman. So I like that because it draws me in. I love her hands. They're it's somewhere between thinking and not ringing, because she's somehow peaceful, but it's still a kind of a worried, she's hunched over, obviously pregnant, who knows at what stage, and we can debate about that. I might leave that to the scripture scholar, but obviously pregnant, and therefore you see this woman and it not rich, it just looks like a woman trying to get to another place and thinking about it. So I think that's so true of our faith in a woman of faith who went through a tough life, even having given birth to the most central reality person of our faith. But she is an intriguing figure, and we don't have many pieces of art like this that allow us to see her as she may have been at that time. I have to say, part of me would have liked, and this, I loved the situation, but you know, she is high up, but actually she's tiny, she's small. So we're not used to seeing our Jewish forebears as small people. Even Jesus may have been smaller than we like to represent him. So there's something fragile about that, and that draws me in. And then finally, I did kind of go reaching behind for Jacob Epstein's life, and he was a Jew, didn't practice his faith after a while of any type, but was obviously well read the scriptures, new and old, they say. So I just find this a fascinating interpretation, presentation of a core figure of our faith that is just beautiful. And I have to say, it's beautiful to stand here and look at, but if you do come and see it, and I'd invite you, whoever does come, you got to walk around sculptures, because sculpture, what it does is it's a place thing, and it gives you a sense of yourself as well as you're looking at it, which is why, I mean, I love her there, you can see her properly, but I'd also like to see her on the ground, like us, if that makes sense, and it gives you more sense. Again, it would be a different sense of ourselves in front of this Jewish woman of faith, just about to give birth. Scariest thing on earth, I imagine. Yeah.
Well, if I could just comment on the setting, I think it is quite lovely. She is a bit high, I tend to agree. I'd prefer a slightly lower pedestal. It makes it appear a little bit more monumental than I think the sculptor intended. But one of the things I love on a morning like this, a beautiful day, is the play of light on the figure. I think that's absolutely fascinating. It's subtle, but in its own way powerful. Now, the other thing I would agree strongly with you, Maeve, on is sculpture is three-dimensional. Now, I've seen many photographs of this work in its various castings, but I had never walked around the statue until this morning. But unless you do walk around a figure like this and see it in its three dimensions, I don't think you can understand what it's doing and saying. For instance, I didn't realise how slight and how small the figure of Mary is, to the point where when you see it and walk around it, her head almost seems too big for the body. Now, the smallness of the figure, so slight, I think talks about a fragility. And you mentioned this, that there's something very fragile about the figure, and yet there's something of the pillar form. So there's the evocation of strength. So one of the things I think that works very powerfully in this work is the combination of fragility and strength. The other thing that intrigues me about a number of things intrigue me about the face. The first is that she's not veiled. Now, that would have been, to put it mildly, unusual at the time, but we're not just doing a figurative work of that time. But that she's unveiled, and the plaited hair makes the figure, the face rather, seem girlish. The hairstyle makes her seem younger. I mean, she would have been young anyway, but it makes her look very young, which again tends to accentuate the fragility. The other thing that strikes me about that face is the inwardness of it. She's come out of her private space to visit Elizabeth, but there's a profound inwardness. So the tension between inward and outward, I think, is fascinatingly done. She strikes me, therefore, as a woman who is both visiting and visited. It's almost the face of someone who is listening. The French have this lovely title of Mary, Notre Dame de l'Écoute, Our Lady of the Listening. And there's something of that there. She's still listening. The other thing that's very striking, to me at least, is the gesture, the hands. In a sense, it's a protective gesture. you can read the hands as a protective canopy over the pregnant womb, but it's almost defensive, and yet it's not defensive. A kind of protective canopy that plays into that sense of vulnerability and strength. So again, I find it fascinating, and I would have loved to see what Epstein did to complete the group. I mean, I imagine an Elizabeth, whereas this has this stillness and inwardness about it, I imagine a spirit-filled Elizabeth with hands raised and as you said, Tom, hailing the Mother of the Lord. But I don't. Do we have sketches?
No,
we have nothing.
Didn't complete.
So it's only half a visitation. But you can't help, when you know the story, but ask, well, what would Epstein have done with Elizabeth? And again, it's one of those questions you can never answer. But it's a fascinating thing to speculate about.
You talked about walking around the statue. I really like the side view of this statue, because
it's only then that you really see her pregnant.
The pregnancy, the arms, and then the head bowed forward as well. You know, like everything speaks of that humility. But it also draws attention then to the shawl that she has. Now you said that
well from front on.
You said that she would have been veiled. Well, presumably that would have been over her head.
Good
now.
point.
So she's gone to visit Elizabeth, a cousin, so family, and so the shawl has kind of is sort of back across her shoulders,
That would have happened in fact if it was woman meeting woman. Yeah.
So it, in that sense too, it kind of works, I think. When I first saw it, I thought she was much older, but as you look at the face, she becomes younger, I think, Maybe the age was the roughness of the bronze,
But look at the face. There is something that evokes older age, for instance, than the hairstyle or the figure. The very slender figure and the hairstyle suggest a young woman. But if you look long enough at the face, you begin to see the signs of the years, shall we say. It's not a troubled face, but it's a face that's pondering large things.
It's bearing responsibility.
Yeah, and kind of preoccupied by that.
Yeah.
So again, with all these tensions that are built into the sculpture, the play of older and younger, stronger, more fragile, and so on. So it's picking up all kinds of tensions which are there in the biblical narrative. Again, to me, to see a Jewish sculptor, certainly one of the quality of Epstein, interpret the figure of the visiting Mary is quite intriguing. And yet again, I think it shows that very often it's the artists with the fresh, unencumbered eye who see things that we, dare I say, religious professionals don't necessarily see at all, and help us perhaps to shed more conventional perceptions and see something new.
Absolutely right, and it's that kind of freedom, the freedom of the artist, which he obviously was in different ways. He was quite
apart from the nudes.
in many ways, and not even he was ahead of his time and pushing against, while integrating, pushing against classic paradigms, if you like, of sculpture. So birthed this really human, thought-provoking, grounded, solid and fragile woman. So I think it's really thought-provoking. Merits some time of just standing and being, really.
But I think you almost have the sense of an inwardness that is about to become outwardness. You can almost see that she's going to open her hands, lift her head, and speak the Magnificat.
Yeah. Yes.
It's just that moment when she's hearing the extraordinary greeting of Elizabeth under the influence of the Spirit, and before she herself breaks into the great hymn of liberation.
But, I mean, she's already said the fiat, the yes. at the Annunciation.
Yeah, but the look on her face suggests, what does the yes imply?
Well, exactly. Now then, like Elizabeth comes and says, you're fabulous. You could understand her saying, well, yes, I am blessed among all women, but she's doing no. My soul glorifies the Lord. So it's that kind of that faith that immediately turns it to God's grace, which I think is really powerful.
The other thing, of course, about Mary, the way she's presented in Luke's Gospel is she signs a blank cheque. When she says fiat, yes, she hasn't got a clue what she's saying yes to.
That's right, yeah.
And you almost see that in the face, that sense of what have I done? Because she only discovers, as the story unfolds, what she's actually done. She said yes, but it's a blank cheque.
And they oft repeated she kept these things, because I do understand she might open to the Magnificat, but as she stands here, for me she's reflective.
Yeah.
She's like holding and reflecting.
No, that's certainly true. But that Mary treasured all these things in her heart. If you look at the Greek, it really, the word is symbalusa, which means she's wrestling, trying to put the pieces together to see what they actually mean. It's like putting a big jigsaw puzzle together. It's not just sitting back saying, isn't this beautiful? She's struggling to put the pieces together to make sense of what's happening in her life. And you see that, I think, on that face. And yet at the same time, it's a struggle that is serene. And I think, again, the face picks up both.
Yes, no, I agree.
Yeah.